Welcome to Chem 101. In this video I want to talk about molecular and ionic compounds, the difference between the two and how we can tell whether we have an ionic compound or a molecular compound. And for example, a molecule like CO2 or a molecule like calcium chloride. We want to know, is this an ionic compound or molecular compound? Same here. Ionic compound or molecular. So there's a organization to the periodic table. This is just a representation of a periodic table. Of course, it doesn't have any of the elements filled in, but we can talk about general regions of the periodic table. So in general, this blue line here actually separates two sides of the periodic table. Separates what we call the nonmetals, and that would be all of these, from the metals. And we kind of have two designations. Between here and here, all of these guys here, we kind of call them the transitional, the transition metals. But they're metals. And everything to this side of the periodic table are metals. All right? And so, let's see, here's hydrogen, lithium, sodium, potassium. And over here we have things like helium, boron, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, neon. And so there's a general rule. For ionic compounds, ionic compounds, we have metals pairing with nonmetals. And it's actually slightly more complicated than that. When we start talking about covalent bonds and sharing of electrons, there's actually a much better way to classify molecular and ionic based on something called electronegativity. But until you learn that, we can kind of guess what it's likely to be just by looking at the two atoms involved, or the atoms involved in general. And so if we were to look here, we'd actually see that calcium is a metal. And if I had a real periodic table up here, calcium would be in here on this side, and chlorine would be over here on this side. And so a metal and a nonmetal together would be an ionic compound. Now, molecular compounds, there's a C in there. These molecular compounds are made up of just nonmetals. And hydrogen tends to count as a nonmetal. So when we see compounds like CH4 or NH3 or, try to think of something else here, carbon, tetrachloride, we would define all of these as nonmetals because they consist of atoms that are here on the right side of the periodic table. So in general, if something from this side pairs with something from this side, we're going to call it ionic. And if something pairs with itself, or if nonmetals pair with nonmetals, we're going to call that molecular compounds. So that's the difference between molecular and ionic. Ionic compounds are actually held together because the two atoms are ions. And so in this case, we have a calcium that has a 2+ charge. So remember what that means. It means that it has 2 more protons than it does electrons. So it must have lost 2 electrons. And it's paired up with 2 chlorine atoms that both have a minus charge. So in the end, this thing is neutral because the 2+ is canceled out by the minus and the minus. So in the next video, I'm going to show you how we can tell what charges atoms will have, simply based on their periodic table position. All right, so in the next video.